The lobby of the Hargrove Grand Hotel smelled like money. Not the kind you earn. The kind you inherit, press into linen, and never discuss at dinner. Caleb Morrow, 41, a plumber from Decatur who had driven 6 hours with his 7-year-old daughter asleep in the back seat, walked through the revolving door, carrying a duffel bag with a broken zipper and a car seat tucked under one arm. He had come for his cousin's wedding. He had worn his best flannel shirt, the dark blue one, because it had no stains, and he had ironed it twice that morning in a rest stop bathroom. His daughter, June, rubbed her eyes and reached for his hand without being asked. The Hargrove Grand sat at the center of downtown Nashville's older block, the kind of building that had been built when permanence was the point. The ceilings were vaulted. The chandeliers had individual bulbs shaped like flames. There were flower arrangements the height of a man, and the flowers had been replaced that morning. Caleb would learn this later, that the flowers were replaced every 48 hours, regardless of whether they had wilted, because the appearance of freshness mattered more than freshness itself. He did not notice any of this at first. He was looking for the check-in desk. June tugged his hand and pointed at a fountain in the center of the lobby, where a stone heron stood with its beak open and water running from the tip. She said it looked like it was singing. Caleb said maybe it was. The desk was attended by a young woman, whose name tag said Veronica, and whose expression said she had already assessed Caleb and arrived at a conclusion before he reached the second marble step. She was 26, had worked the front desk for 3 years, and had a particular fluency in the language of first impressions, the kind hotels trained you in without ever saying so directly. He gave his name, she typed it in. She said nothing for a moment. He said he had a reservation, 2 nights, double room, for the Hartley wedding party block. She typed again. She looked at her screen. She said, in a voice that was careful and airless, that she was seeing some irregularities with the reservation. Caleb asked what kind of irregularities. She said the room had been flagged. She couldn't say more than that. He stood with June holding his hand, and the duffel on his shoulder, and he waited. He was a patient man, the kind of patient that comes from years of being called to other people's disasters. Busted pipes, flooded basements, sewage backing up into kitchen sinks at 2 in the morning. He had learned not to panic. He had learned that most problems, if you looked at them steadily, had a visible cause. He asked if someone could clarify what flagged meant. Veronica said she would need to call her supervisor. The supervisor was a man named Doyle, mid-40s, with the bearing of someone who had confused formality with authority. He came from the back office, with his hands folded in front of him, and he listened to Veronica say 2 words into his ear, before he looked at Caleb in a way that told Caleb everything that was about to happen. Doyle said the room had been placed on hold pending review of the booking. Caleb said the booking had been made 6 weeks ago. Doyle said he understood that, but there were concerns. Caleb asked what concerns. There was a pause, and in that pause June looked up at Doyle and then at her father, reading something in the air between them the way children do. Not the words but the weight. Doyle said that the hotel had a standard for guests, and that it sometimes needed to ensure the comfort of all parties. Caleb said he wasn't sure what that meant. Doyle said he thought Caleb probably understood. That was when an older woman who had been seated in one of the lobby chairs, a small, thin woman in a gray cardigan, with a canvas bag on her lap, and reading glasses that had been repaired at the hinge with a twist of wire, stood up slowly, using the arm of the chair for support, and began making her way toward the elevator bank on the far side of the lobby. She was perhaps 78. She had white hair cut short and practical, and she wore flat shoes that had been resoled at least once. Her name was Irene Callahan, and she had been a guest at the Hargrove Grand for 4 days. She was not a flashy guest. She was not the kind of guest the hotel photographed for its website. She had booked a modest room and paid for it in full, not with a corporate card, not with points, but with a personal check drawn from an account at a small credit union in Knoxville, Tennessee, where she had lived for over 50 years. She was 3 steps from the elevator when a hotel security officer named Derek moved in front of her. He did not say, "Excuse me." He said, "Ma'am, I need you to stop. She stopped. She was not a woman who startled easily, but there was something in the way he had positioned himself, square, blocking, that made her hands tighten on the strap of her bag. He said the hotel had received a complaint from another guest. He said she had been seen in the lobby multiple times over the past day, without engaging in any transactions, and it had raised questions about whether she was a registered guest or was loitering in a climate-controlled space without entitlement. Irene looked at him. She said she was a registered guest. He said he would need to see her key card. She opened her bag slowly. The bag was canvas, faded, with a small tear near the bottom that had been stitched closed with dark thread. She found the key card and held it out. He took it. He said he would need to verify it at the desk. She said all right. He put one hand near, not on but near her elbow, and began moving her in the direction of the front desk. This was the moment Caleb saw it. He had been standing at the desk still waiting for Doyle to finish his performance of procedural concern. And he turned because June had gone quiet beside him, in the way she went quiet when something felt wrong, and he saw the security officer guiding the older woman across the lobby, with the proprietary care of someone managing a problem rather than assisting a person. He said, to no one in particular, "What is happening here?" It was not a question. It landed differently than a question would have. Derek turned. Doyle turned. Veronica looked up. And Irene, who had been keeping her eyes at a dignified midpoint above embarrassment, looked over too. Caleb let go of June's hand. She immediately took hold of the pocket of his jeans instead, which she had been doing since she was 4. And he walked across the lobby. He said to Derek, "Why are you moving her?" Derek said, this was a hotel matter. Caleb said he could see that, and he was asking what kind of hotel matter required a security officer to walk a 70-something woman across a lobby by the elbow when she hadn't done anything. Derek said she hadn't verified her guest status. Caleb looked at the key card still in Derek's hand, and then looked at Derek. He said, "She handed you her key card and you're still holding it." Derek said it needed to be verified. Caleb said, "So verify it right here." Why does verifying a key card require moving her anywhere? There was a quality to the way Caleb asked this that made it difficult to answer. He wasn't loud. He wasn't threatening. He asked like a man who genuinely couldn't understand the answer and was waiting to hear one that made sense, which was in some ways harder to dismiss than anger would have been. Doyle stepped forward. He said this was a private matter between the hotel and its guests. Caleb said, "Is she a guest?" That was what they were determining. Caleb said, "She gave him her key card." That's a determination. June pulled gently on his pocket. She looked up at him and said very quietly, "Daddy, is that lady in trouble?" He looked down at her. He said no. He said the lady was a guest at the hotel, and everything was going to be fine. June looked at Irene. Then she looked at the security officer. Then she looked at Doyle with the unflinching appraisal only small children and very old people have fully mastered. She said, "Why are you making her look scared?" No one said anything for a moment. The lobby had the ambient noise of a lobby. Distant heels on marble, the fountain, a muffled television from somewhere, and under all of that was a specific quality of silence that follows when a child says a true thing in a room full of adults who have been pretending it isn't true. Doyle said this was not an appropriate conversation to be having in the lobby. Caleb said, "Then let's have it at the front desk. Walk her key card over, run it, confirm she's a guest, and then you can tell me what legitimate reason there was to move her across the lobby before doing that." Doyle looked at him for a long moment. Doyle was accustomed to people accepting procedural language as a substitute for explanation. He was not particularly accustomed to someone standing in front of him, with a broken zipper duffel bag and a child holding his pocket who refused to accept the substitution. Irene said quietly, "It's all right. I can just..." Caleb said gently, "You don't have to go anywhere." She stopped. She looked at him with an expression that was careful and considered. The expression of someone who had learned through long experience to be cautious about which help to accept. He said, "My name's Caleb. I'm here for a wedding." "What's your name?" she said. "Irene." He said, "You're a guest here, Irene?" She said yes. He said, "You're not going anywhere then." At the front desk, Doyle ran the keycard himself. It returned clean. Room 412. Irene Callahan. Checked in Monday. Checking out Friday. No flags, no complaints originating from her room, no billing issues. Doyle said the concern had been raised by another party. Caleb asked which party. Doyle said he couldn't disclose that. Caleb said, so a complaint from an unidentifiable source was enough reason to dispatch a security officer to move a paying, verified guest across your lobby. Doyle said the hotel had an obligation to all its guests. Caleb said, what was the complaint? Doyle paused. Said, because I watched him stop her on her way to the elevator, and I didn't see her do anything. I watched the whole thing. My daughter watched the whole thing. And I'm having trouble understanding what action of hers prompted a response. Doyle said that sometimes guests made the hotel aware of certain concerns. Caleb said, what kind of concern does a woman walking through a lobby raise? The silence this time was different. It was the silence of an answer that existed but could not be said aloud. Because saying it aloud would mean saying it aloud. There was a couple standing near the concierge desk who had drifted closer, not obviously, in the way people drift when they're listening. A man in a business suit near the elevator bank had not pressed the button again, though he had pressed it once already. A woman with a rolling suitcase had stopped adjusting its handle. June let go of Caleb's pocket and looked at Irene and said, are you here, by yourself? Irene looked down at her. She said her husband had passed some years ago, and yes, she was traveling by herself. June said, we're here for a wedding, are you here for something fun? Irene said she was here because this had been her and her husband's hotel. They had stayed here every anniversary for 31 years. This was the first time she had come since he died. She had almost not come. But she had decided she wanted to. June said, that sounds really brave. Irene looked at her for a moment in a way that made something shift behind her eyes, and she said, I suppose it does. Caleb had been listening. He had also been watching Doyle, who had the expression of a man waiting for the room to return to a state he could manage, and he said to Doyle, how long has she been a guest here? Doyle said since Monday. Caleb said, how many complaints have originated from her room? Doyle said none. Caleb said, how many incidents has she been involved in during her stay? Doyle said none. Caleb said, and the complaint that prompted this, was it written, verbal, in what form? Doyle said it had been verbal, relayed through a staff member. Caleb said, which staff member? Doyle said he couldn't disclose that. Caleb said, a verbal complaint, from an anonymous guest, relayed through an unnamed staff member about a verified paying guest who has had 0 incidents in 4 days, was enough to send your security officer to intercept her before she could get to her room. He said it the way you say a math problem out loud to show where the math doesn't add up. Doyle said the hotel had the right to investigate any concerns. Caleb said, investigating and intercepting are different things. He asked Doyle what, specifically, the complaint had said the woman was doing wrong. Doyle said it had been reported that she appeared to not be a guest. Caleb said, based on what? Another pause. He said, based on what she was wearing. Based on her bag? Based on her shoes? He said it flatly, not with anger, just with the patient insistence of someone who would wait as long as it took to hear an answer. Veronica had stopped typing. The man in the business suit near the elevator had turned slightly. The couple by the concierge desk were no longer pretending to look at a brochure. Doyle said he was not in a position to speak for the motivations of the reporting guest. Caleb said, then let me tell you what it looks like from where I'm standing. It looks like someone looked at this woman and decided she didn't belong here, and your hotel acted on that without asking her a single question first. He said, you sent a security officer to move her, physically, across your lobby, on the basis of how she looks. That's what happened. Doyle said the hotel did not discriminate. Caleb said, I didn't say discriminate. I said you moved her across your lobby before verifying anything. I watched it happen. June was standing beside Irene now. She had moved there at some point without anyone noticing. She was looking up at Irene's canvas bag and she said, I like your bag. My grandma has one kind of like that. Irene looked down at her. She said it had been her daughter's first. June said, "What happened to your daughters?" Irene said her daughter had given her this one when she moved away to Portland. She said she had been meaning to get a new one, but she kept forgetting. June said, "My daddy has a jacket he never throws away either." Caleb said, June. June said, "What?" "It's true." A man who had just come from the direction of the hotel restaurant. 50s. Silver at the temples. The careful dress of someone who understood that clothes were a form of communication, stopped when he read the room. His name was Warren Ashby, and he was the hotel's general manager, and he had come through the lobby on his way to an afternoon meeting, which was a thing he did most days, and he could tell from 12 feet away that something had gone wrong in his lobby. He walked to the desk. He asked Doyle quietly what was happening. Doyle gave him a version of events that was accurate in sequence and empty of its substance. Warren looked at Irene. He looked at Caleb. He looked at June. He looked at the people standing nearby who were not quite pretending to be somewhere else anymore. He said to Irene, "Mrs. Callahan?" She said yes. He said, "I'm Warren Ashby. I'm the general manager of this hotel. I want to apologize to you for what happened just now." She looked at him steadily. He said, "You are a guest of this hotel and you should not have been stopped. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." Irene said after a moment, "I've been coming to this hotel for 31 years. He said he knew. She said, "My husband and I spent our 30th anniversary here. He died 14 months ago." Warren said, "I know that too, Mrs. Callahan. Your file is in our system. You're a long-term guest of this hotel." There was something in the way she heard that. Something that she had needed to hear and hadn't been sure she would. She straightened very slight, the way a person straightens when the ground turns out to be solid. She said, "I would like to go to my room." Warren said, "Of course. Derek will have your key card back to you right now." Derek gave it back. He said nothing. There was nothing to say that wasn't worse than silence. Warren asked if someone from the team could carry her bag up. Irene said she was capable of carrying her own bag. He said, "I know you are." She picked it up. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder. She looked at Caleb and then at June, and she said to June, "Thank you for talking to me." June said, "You're welcome. I hope the rest of your trip is good." Irene said she thought it might be. She went to the elevator. She pressed the button. The doors opened immediately, as if the building itself had been waiting. She stepped in. She turned around. The doors closed. Caleb stood at the desk for another moment. He was aware of the people who had drifted close, still drifting in the ambient space of the aftermath. He was aware that he still had a reservation problem to resolve. He was aware that June was standing next to him now, hand back in his pocket. Warren turned to him. He said, "Mr. Morrow." Caleb said yes. Warren said, "I understand there was also an issue with your reservation." Caleb said there had been. Warren pulled up his screen. He looked at it. He said the reservation was confirmed and clear. He looked at Doyle. He said he would like to speak to Doyle privately, after the check-in was complete. Doyle's face did a thing faces do when they understand that a conversation is coming that they cannot control. Warren personally completed Caleb's check-in. He upgraded the room without being asked and without mentioning it as a favor. He simply gave Caleb a key card for a room on the 6th floor, with a view of the Cumberland River, and said he hoped Caleb and his daughter would enjoy the wedding. Caleb picked up the duffel. June picked up the car seat, which she was too small to carry properly, but insisted on carrying anyway. They walked toward the elevator. June pressed the button. While they waited, she said, "Daddy, why did that man stop that lady?" He said he wasn't entirely sure. She said, "Was it because of her bag?" He said he thought that might have been part of it. She said, "That's a dumb reason." He said he agreed. She said, "If someone stopped me because of my bag, I'd be really sad." He said he knew. She thought about this. The elevator came. Inside, she pressed 4 and 6 without asking and then said, "He said she already pushed it." She said, "Oh." She looked at the lit buttons. She said, "Good." The doors opened on the 4th floor. There was a long, quiet hallway with a runner carpet the color of old wine. At the far end, the door to room 412 was just swinging closed. June looked at it. She said, "I'm glad she's okay." Caleb said, "Me too, Bug." The doors closed again and they went up. The wedding the next afternoon was held in the hotel's garden terrace, which smelled like cut grass and someone's grandmother's perfume in the best possible way. Caleb wore the blue flannel shirt, because he had already worn it once and it still had no stains. June wore a yellow dress she had picked out herself, with white shoes she had decorated with marker flowers on the toes. During the reception, Caleb was standing near the buffet table, with a plate of something he wasn't sure about when he saw Irene Callahan sitting alone at a small table near the garden wall. She was not at the wedding. She was simply nearby, in a chair, watching the garden the way people watch things they are trying to hold in their minds. He picked up a second plate and carried it over. He said he hoped she didn't mind. She looked at the plate, and then at him, and said she didn't. He sat down. June appeared from somewhere with a cookie and a purpose, and stationed herself next to Irene and said, "You're still here." Irene said she was checking out tomorrow, but she wanted to sit in the garden one more time. She said her husband had proposed to her in a garden. Not this one. A different one. But gardens made her think of it. June said, "That's really pretty." Irene said she had thought so too. Caleb said, "Did you report what happened yesterday?" Irene said she had spoken to Mr. Ashby. She said he had been very kind. She said she wasn't sure what would come of it. Caleb said, "Something should come of it." She said, "I'm 80 years old. I have found that the most I can control is whether I come back." He said, "Will you?" She looked at the garden wall, at the light coming through the late afternoon clouds, at something she was measuring privately. She said, "I think so. 31 years is a long time to stop coming somewhere because of one bad day." June said, 31 years is really long. I've only been alive for 7. Irene said that was a very good start. The evening went the way wedding evenings go. Loudly, then warmly, then with slow dancing that no one was too proud for by the end. Caleb danced with June on his feet like he had when she was smaller, even though she was too big for it now, and she laughed and let him. The next morning he was loading the car when he saw Irene in the hotel's side driveway, with her canvas bag waiting for a taxi. He waved. She raised one hand. The bag's repaired seam caught the morning light. A thin dark line of careful thread running the length of it, holding together something that might otherwise have come apart. He thought about the things you carry for 31 years. The things you repair rather than replace, because replacing them would mean something you're not ready to decide. He got June into her car seat. She had her stuffed rabbit and a cracker, and was already asking about the radio. He started the car. He pulled out of the parking structure and into the bright Nashville morning, which was loud and warm, and smelled like river water, and someone's breakfast coming out of a nearby kitchen window. June said, from the back seat, "Daddy, I want to come back here someday." He looked at her in the rearview mirror. He said, "Yeah," she said, "for my anniversary." He said she was 7. She said, "I know. I'm planning ahead." He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that catches you before you decide whether to have it. He said, "Okay, Bug. We'll come back." And then the hotel was behind them, and the highway was ahead of them, and June turned on the radio herself. She had learned the controls 2 weeks ago, and used them without asking now, which was fine. Because she had decent taste, and they drove home to Decatur, with the windows down, and the morning air coming in, and everything that had happened folded away into the category of things that had happened, which was also the category of things that had mattered.